So, Matt, hello.
Hello.
I'm sure no one from high school is surprised that you've stuck at it and become a filmmaker. You had the drive then, and you have it now. But where did it all start for you, this movie love?
Man, that's pretty difficult for me. It was somewhere in between when I saw E.T. for the first time and then seeing Jurassic Park, because I know by the time I saw Jurassic Park on June 11th, '93.
Do you still have your ticket stub?
I don't have my ticket stub, but I actually do have a piece of amber with a mosquito inside it, which was the first thing that I ever bought with my own money, right after seeing Jurassic Park. But by that time that Jurassic Park came out, I was already there was nothing else that I wanted to do by that point. So I was 7 then, so I knew it already had to have been going on for some time. I just don't remember exactly when. I can't really vividly remember a time when I didn't want to.
So you've described being 17 as a time when you, in some ways, feel like you know it all, but actually don't know shit.
Right.
So we can all probably relate to that statement in hindsight. Though a more charitable view would be that high school students, for the most part, haven't yet had the chance to get overly cynical.
Right. Yes. I mean, I think both are true. I think, though, that going to a college prep high school and reading a lot of material that is, for all intents and purposes, really meant to be consumed by adults, and we are just sort of trying out these new adult suits that we're putting on and testing the boundaries. We have to sort of play the role and fake it before we actually have earned the right to call ourselves adults, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it does sort of set us up for this kind of fall, I think, when we realize that we may be able to quote a lot of interesting writers and ideas, but we haven't lived any of it yet.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me to Take Me to the River. In what ways, if any, is Ryder your alter ego?
He is my alter ego. He is me, basically, at 17. Essentially, I mean, his sort of self-righteousness and overconfidence when walking into a seemingly hostile environment was taken from me directly. I remember a lot of times really wanting to get into an argument with somebody, wanting to make somebody uncomfortable to start an argument, and then when that argument didn't really play out like I thought, almost being kind of sad that no one wanted to argue back with me as a 17-year-old. And so I put that right into him. My best friend growing up's name was Ryder, so that's where I get the name.
So there's also an emotional reality that sparked the film, I guess, from this anxiety dream you had, right? Can you describe that dream?
Yeah, so, I mean, the setup is that my family is from Nebraska, and I would go back to the farmhouse that's in the movie to have a reunion every summer, just exactly out of the movie.
Yeah.
And so the nightmare that I had was happening at one of these family summer picnics that I was very familiar with. Honestly, the only thing that I, at this point, remember about the plot of the dream is that there was a misunderstanding, and I was accused of some sort of inappropriate interaction with one of my cousins. But I don't really remember what that misunderstanding was. I just remember waking up and being incredibly stressed out and having this really kind of all through the day unshakable visceral sense of unease, and specifically at at how helpless I felt when I realized I couldn't talk my way out of it. So the entry point for me was a character who really relies on like his ability to beat someone in a logical argument, who finds himself in an environment where that logic like does not work, and is like left without any weaponry at all. Yeah.
And are you one of those guys who keeps a pad by the nightstand or dream journal, or that just sticks in your brain?
I tried that. I did it for like a week and I couldn't. Yeah, no. Usually, like, I think that my tendency, I have a pretty good memory for movie ideas because I've like developed a habit since I was like 7 of like of recording them, but my like I think that there's a nice sort of filter of memory that something that you do remember is probably good enough and sticky enough to actually like make a story about, and something that you forget probably you should forget.
Yeah. So you had also had a specific plan for making the audience feel a similar anxiety. Can you talk about what that plan was?
Yeah, I think it began when I was describing to a friend of mine who was a philosophy student what I was sort of after. And he said, "It sounds like you are trying to make something that's uncanny." And I was like, "Well, it's more than just strange." And he was like, No, well, uncanny doesn't just mean strange. I think you should go look it up. It has a more specific meaning. So I did, and he was like, exactly right. And the example that I always thought was so great for something that is uncanny, meaning something that is simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar, creating this very strong sense of unease in us. More unease than if something were to be decidedly unfamiliar. A really great example is like if you were to walk into your living room and all of your furniture had been like moved but only a couple inches, and you just like know it in your body that something's wrong, but you can't tell exactly what was moved.
Right. It's more unsettling than if there were a killer clown on the couch. Right.
Well, I mean, clowns are very very scary, but more upsetting than if your chair was on the other side of the room. You'd be like, oh well, the chair moved.
Right.
Like if you can't quite place your finger on what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that do you know this idea of the uncanny valley?
Yeah, right. With the characters with the dead eyes.
Right. So like as like an automaton like robot approaches looking human like and lifelike, it actually we will tend to empathize with it as it gains more and more human-like qualities until it becomes too human-like, but yet still not completely human-like, and then it becomes like really terrifying.
Right.
And so I was thinking a lot about that when dealing with the uncle character in this movie. Is like he obviously is like a real like human standing there in front of us, but like sometimes his eyes look like they might just be like like the eyes of a shark or something, not quite human, which I thought was a good way to make people very uncomfortable.
So this is a coming-of-age story for Ryder, and maybe to a lesser extent for Molly in this sort of corrupted, premature way. So how did you see the kind of parameters of that coming-of-age story for either of them, I guess?
Well, first of all, I just wrote a script I wrote a version of the script in like a month, and I didn't really stop to think about what the goal of the first draft was to capture and deliver to the audience that palpable unease that I felt from my dream. And I didn't stop to think about what the story was like really about until I finished and then read it back through, and I was like, oh, this is Ryder's coming of age, and it's sort of, I was like writing it during my own kind of coming of age, so it was a little bit hard to see until I could look back on it, what the aspects of his coming of age were, and we spoke a little bit to that already about like the moment when he realizes that his mouth isn't going to be able to save him in this situation, and that the movie it's going on in his mind, of which he is like perpetually the star, is not the movie of life is not just about him. It's about like all of these other people too.
Right.
So that's how I would describe like his coming of age. But for Molly, I think that we leave her like right at the moment before the incidents that happen in the film are going to be recorded by the adults who tell her what happened in her memory. So I would like to leave the audience with the question, you know, this whole thing could go two different ways for Molly. She could be told that what happened between her and Ryder was a natural exploration of sexuality, or she could be told something else. And we get to see in Cindy, the mother, and Keith, the uncle, where she might be in 30 years if she's told that it is wrong. And we get to see maybe more in Ryder, like where she might be if she's told that it's right.
Right.
And that sort of like two-path potential I was kind of interested in leaving her at the crossroads at.
Right. The movie also has this theme that resonated with me of the conspiracy of silence, which tends to plague families, perhaps, in particular. What did you hope to bring out about that? These kind of taboo subjects, the gossip instead of the direct communication.
Right. Yeah, so this phrase that I remembered. Well, okay. First of all, I'll begin by saying this is set in Nebraska, and like my family's from Nebraska, but nobody in this movie is based on a member of my family.
Right.
Just, but something that is based on my family, and like I think families in general, is this conspiracy of silence. And I remember my grandmother saying, "If it don't scare the horses." Have you ever heard that phrase?
No.
So it's kind of like a bastardization and a bit of a misuse of the original quote, which came from the trial of Oscar Wilde, where a friend of his was brought to the stand, and she said, "I don't care what people do in the privacy of their own homes as long as they don't do it in the middle of the street and scare the horses."
Okay, right.
And but literally because they own horses, they're using it on the farm to mean like literally, if it doesn't disturb the operation of the farm, then like let's not talk about it. And I think that that's like sort of a an MO that I see in my family and in myself too, just from like kind of inheriting that from them. That to air your psychological issues might be seen as something of a weakness. Like, the cowboy would never do that.
Right.
And yet, those issues don't go away when you ignore them, they just fester.
Right.
And so I have seen, like, quite explosive situations where something that someone had been bottling up for 20, 30, 40... 50 years, like, comes out at a really inopportune moment. I thought that a place where nobody really talks about what's happening is the perfect place to set a story where people really need to talk about what's happening.
So let's get symbolist a little bit here. We're kind of here to get a little analytical. Though the movie nicely doesn't hit any nails in the head, which is one of the things I love about it. But could you talk a little bit about the baptismal metaphor that is sort of nudged along by the title?
Yeah. Well, that actually wasn't the original title.
Right.
The original title was a very embarrassing art school title that I thought of. Well, I was in art school when I wrote it, called Explosion, or the Four-Sided Triangle. And it was about a logic theory, explosion logic theory. I'm not going to go into that. But I knew after we shot the film and we saw on set how this scene at the river was so the heart of the story. And it was a thing that both mother and son had been through. Both, actually, like really all the characters had been through a formative incident at the river. An incident that they would be sort of living with for the rest of their lives and checking themselves against. And it seemed to me sort of like a rite of passage for like people in this family. I don't know why they just keep ending up at the river. And so I thought it really should have something to do with this sort of baptismal imagery. However, I thought it interesting to frame a baptism not as, keep it as a rite of passage and the entry into adulthood, but reframe it not as a cleansing, but as sort of like a dirtying or muddying, a confusing of the situation. Because instead of becoming like galvanized, like you might expect someone in another coming of age story to become, he kind of like goes the opposite direction. He becomes like a lot more confused about the things he thought he was clear about at the beginning. And that's why we picked the image of him with the mud on his chest as being like, you're like baptized in mud.
You also have said that you had some lofty conceptions about these three sort of mini journeys within the story. One being to the cottage, one being to Uncle Keith's house.
Four, yeah.
Or four, okay.
Well,
and the trip to the river, and what's the fourth?
Well, I mean, I would say that the first chapter, like on the farm, was okay. So this is like. I just sort of had this feeling, this is actually incredibly, I haven't really found a good way of speaking about this, and I was actually like, my editor was getting extremely frustrated with me as I would try to go into this idea. But I had this just feeling when writing the script that it was sort of a fable, and it wasn't meant to strictly hold to realism. And I found this landscape being so elemental was like a nice place for a fable. Like there's the farm, there's the shack, there's like the uncle's house and the river, and it's like, and then between them is just this like stage, this like field. So like in a fable, like when someone might like go to the river to be transformed, like that's sort of what I thought like Ryder's journey was like to the river, and it sort of functioned more by fable logic. Like he would go out to the shack because that's like where he needs to go to be banished and to like spend time in the desert, and then he will go over to his uncle's house because that's where he needs to go to enter the lion's den, and then he will go to the river because that's where he needs to go to become a man. And though it's really not explicit at all, and it's not even something that like I was able to fully articulate to people who like worked on the film. I just sort of had this feeling about it, and I think choice of pacing and the way we shot it, and which shots I decided to use to introduce these different locations came from that idea. Yeah,
it was interesting. Before I learned in my research that Ryder was an actual friend of yours, I actually thought that maybe with the Uncle Keith's house, then you were going for a Red Riding Hood kind of feel of a fable because it's sort of like you said the lion's den, but like the relative who's
actually
dangerous.
You're not the first person to ask me that because he wears. I didn't realize this, but. He's carrying a picnic basket back to the house in the morning, and then he's wearing a blue like kind of hood, and someone was like, "Are you making a Red Riding Hood reference, but like a Blue Riding Hood?" And I was like, "No, actually,
That's what happens. You start playing around in the fable area, right?" Speaking of Red Riding Hood, though not what I had in mind with this question, I liked how recessive a figure the grandmother is. And how she's looking away in the family photo, and I wondered if that detail was accidental or lucky accidental or intentional.
Oh, looking away in the family photo. Well, somewhat. We picked the take where that was most awkward, but like we gave her a line right as it's being, like she's asking, she's saying like I need to go like check on the beans or they're in the oven, like right as the camera goes off. So she was probably looking back to the kitchen. But as far as her being this like sort of like all-seeing but never there character, that was very much like my grandmother. And there was like a situation where something was going on in the family that like all of like my mother and her siblings wanted to protect Grandma from knowing, and then finally when she found out, she was like, "How did you find out? I've known for years," and but she was never at any of the conversations where they talked about it, And but everyone was like whispering like, oh, we can't let Grandma find out. I just thought that was kind of an interesting situation.
Yeah.
And it begs the question, like, when Cindy comes out to the shack to ask Ryder to stay there, under the sort of guise of Grandma wanted you to stay here, is it really just that she has invented this situation because she thinks that that's what would make Grandma happy, or did Grandma actually say that?
Yeah.
And I spoke about that with the actress. It's not clear whether or not Cindy might be lying there. Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back to Take Me to the River, because I'm imagining we might be running low on time. But I want to ask a few kind of broader questions about your career. As your bio says, you've been an active screenwriter for the last 12 years. Did it take you shorter or longer than expected to have a celebrated feature debut at Sundance?
Oh man, way longer. I thought I was gonna, before getting out of high school. I thought, no, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I made movies in high school, and was at the Bellarmine Film Festival. But I started going to Sundance when I was 13, actually before high school, and the first movie, we just went as a family trip, and the first movie we ever saw there was Memento. We didn't know what we were buying tickets for. We just walked in and were like, oh,
I think I might have heard you tell that story.
Probably.
On the Bellarmine campus.
Yeah, and then we had tickets for, the movie ended, we were all like stunned,
yeah.
And we had tickets for something else later that night, as one does at a film festival, and we all walked outside and looked at each other and were like, I don't think I can see another movie right now. I kind of just want to go get some soup noodles and talk about this.
Yeah.
And that became recorded in my mind as a 13-year-old, how you judge the success or failure of a film is if you talk about it at dinner or not.
Yeah.
And so that was always the goal. How quickly it happened, I soon realized I was not solely in control of. But I feel good about it. I told that story when we were back showing it at Sundance in the same theater that I saw that Memento, and it was a special moment.
So on a similar note, from Sundance and this film, you made an immediate leap to a studio deal to direct an in-development YA adaptation and potential tentpole in the Scorpio races. Were you surprised to change lanes,
yes.
so to speak, so quickly? It sounds like you have a hell of an agent.
Well, yeah, okay, so here's what happened. They all of the agents in the industry, people who were at Sundance, saw it, and they're like, well, that movie's kind of weird, but it seems kind of like a thriller. It seems like he could make a thriller.
Yeah.
So they started sending me all of these thriller scripts, which were versions of everything wants to be Silence of the Lambs, but nothing is.
Right.
And I just kept saying no. I really honestly, I have no interest in directing thrillers, making a career of that. This movie happened to feel like a thriller, but the genre is really the clothes that you dress the story up in. And I saw this script for this movie about a mythical island off the coast of Ireland, and these Celtic mythic creatures that are water horses that are hunt and live underwater and attack people, pull them off fishing boats, and then can be trained and raced. And I was I'm seeing Jaws and Jurassic Park, and it's all coming back to the beginning for me. And I was this is I did not imagine I would do anything like this. So I went into focus, and I was really, can't tell you exactly why I'm here. You might think that my agents think it's weird that I'm going in on this. I think it's weird, but for some reason I haven't really been able to stop thinking about this story for the last week, and I'm just here to figure out why. And that went over so much better than me coming in and being give me the job, you know?
Right.
And because they could see that I was that I wouldn't have been there unless I was genuinely taken by it. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So there's a script I gathered is it by Jack Thorne? Is that right? Yeah. And I wanted to know what your take is on the material. Maybe you just answered this question, but what interests you in it? What was it? Did you figure that out?
Yeah. So it was an image that first interested me, which was a swim, very much like the opening of Jaws. I don't know if I can give away the scene. No, there's a scene where like so a girl is attacked by one of these horses, and we're diving underwater. We're expecting to see like a sea creature that we're quite familiar with, but instead we see this other creature which we are familiar with, but in an entirely different context. And this like horse is moving more like a dolphin or a porpoise than it is like a horse, and I was just like trying to wrap my mind around that image. And then I just started drawing pictures and trying to figure out what that would look like, and I got really into drawing pictures. So that was initially what brought me in, and then there was, I mean, the story's really about a boy and a girl, and both of them who have these, well, the boy who has a traumatic event in his life that he needs to sort of let go to get to the end of the film, and a girl who needs to let somebody into her life for the first time to get to the end of the film, and both of them needing to have overcome these obstacles to get to the end of the film together. And there is this fable that I read. I'm very into fables. This fable that it reminded me of a Sufi fable that like my dad read me when I was a kid, about a stream that is trying to get across a desert, and in order to get across the desert, it needs to let itself be evaporated and then rained down on the other side of the desert. But it's afraid to do so because it's afraid that it will not be the same stream that it was when it started. And it needs to accept that it's going to be changed to move forward. And that's sort of like a theme that whether the author and the writer intended to be in the movie, I really saw, and I like went in strong with that, and they were like, yes, so that's what we're doing with it.
Great. You have a thing about streams of consciousness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So it would probably be pretty easy to get cynical in your line of work, but it's early yet, right? Have you thus far? How have you felt thus far about the gauntlets of smaller fests, CineQuest, studios, the Nouveau studio system?
I've had only great experiences so far. I mean, I think that like this film has been challenging for some, but and it's easy to like come off of like the hype of Sundance and be like, why can't just everybody like my movie? Yeah. But then thinking back to when I started writing it, I was like, it's exactly what I expected. Like there's going to be 30% of people who walk in to see this movie who never signed up for an experience like this, who shouldn't probably, I would advise you not to have come. Yeah. It is a more rigorous experience, I'd say, that invites and sometimes demands the audience to participate in telling the story. I totally get that that's not for everybody. But then on the flip side of that, I also anticipated and have found that people who do like that are like adamant about the movie. Yeah. So it's really exactly what I ordered, I think. Right. Yeah, now that it's arrived at my table.
Yeah, that's a good place to be, I think. And to end on a cinematic high note, what film that you've seen lately has got your juices flowing?
Oh, man. I just saw, it's not new, but Margaret.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Kenneth Lonergan.
Yeah. I mean, the full version of that I saw like a couple weeks ago. Man, I was so blown away by that movie. I loved it so much. And there's a similar scene in that like reminded me of this, where the Anna Paquin character is like talking about her own incredible experience of like holding this woman while she was dying, and then this woman's friend like just like totally puts the kibosh on. It's like, this movie's not about you. Like, this is a friend of mine. Like, you just waltzed into our lives. Like this is about, you have no right to be here. And that was so like perfect. Like a teenager thinking the movie was always about them. And that really reminded me of what we were trying to do with this, and I loved it. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you again.
Awesome.
Keep fighting the cinematic good fight.
Yeah. Always.